begin record. And I just want to take a minute to thank you guys so much for joining us today. Our speaker is Mitchel Ahern. He is a multidisciplinary artist who wears many hats with the Museum of Printing. And today he's here to talk to us about restoring presses, which I know many of us are super excited about because we're in that process. And I do want to give a special shout out to let you know that this talk is supported by the Museum of Printing in Haverhill, Massachusetts. They support free content to advance letterpress education, and they have very generously allowed Mitchel to talk with us today, and then also provided some back-end support by way of advertising and making sure that this content gets out to folks. They were founded in 1978, and their mission is to save and preserve printing equipment and library materials associated with graphic arts. So please take a moment and say thank you to them and like their page and learn a little bit more about them. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mitchel.
Hey, hello everybody. Let's see. Oh yeah, there's the camera view. So I'm trying this two-camera setup thing. We hope that's not too seasick inducing. So yeah, my name is Mitchel Ahern. I work out of the museum as volunteer staff person at the Museum of Printing, where I do, among other things, I restore a lot of printing presses. I also have my own shop. I'm actually in my own shop today, and also print out of Reflex Letterpress, Flower City Art Center, and also the Tunbridge World's Fair Antique Hill print shop. So as I'm going along, please just jump in with you if you have questions, or if you want to correct something that I'm doing all wrong all this time. That's all perfectly acceptable. So we're going to talk about restoring presses, right? And basically, restoring presses is really not that difficult. Not much to teach. It's mostly elbow grease, right? It's mostly just getting in there, cleaning up and working on them, not breaking stuff, not losing stuff, getting it all back together, and doing so without hurting yourself, somebody else, or the press. That's the short version. So what are we going to do today? We're going to talk a little bit about restorable presses. You know, what it takes to do a press restoration. You know, how much restoration you want to do, sort of levels of restoration, some issues around how to take presses apart, how to put them back together again, how to clean them, you know, and how to repair or find or remake parts. So that's the kind of general program, but I'm perfectly happy to divert into any other channel. So we're doing this here in my shop. I'll just give you, it's a very small shop, so it won't take long to give you the guided tour. There's my paper cutter. There's my Golding Pearl 14. There's all the linoleum blocks, wood type, lead type, spacing material, more spacing material, cuts, and a couple of presses that I've already restored, spare parts. So we'll press on from there. So, okay, well, let's talk just a little bit about finding a press to restore. I'll try not to swing that camera around so hard. And what kinds of presses are we talking about? So what I have here are called floor platen presses. You can find them around in various stages of repair. There's also tabletop presses. I have here actually a nice poster that the Museum of Printing puts out. So you have your floor platens and your tabletops and your proof presses. These are the three types of presses that you're likely to come across as someone with a home studio. You also have, the big hand presses and, the automated presses. Those are pretty big deal. So this poster can be downloaded from the Museum of Printing website, or if you write the museum, Frank will probably send you a copy, certainly if you become a member. So, what I have in front of me here are floor platens. That's really what I'll use as examples. I've also worked on a lot of tabletop presses, but I don't have any in the shop right now. So, where would you find a press? That's a good question. There's places like the Museum of Printing. We sell presses. You know, right now during the lockdown, it's kind of hard to get in and visit us, but we do have presses we're restoring, and we're going to sell them online. So that's a place. Briar Press is a website that basically everyone in the letterpress world pays attention to. That you can buy presses are bought and sold there all the time. It's a great place to look, and also there's tons and tons of information. You can ask questions. It's a wonderful resource. Highly recommend it. There's retail places. There's letterpress things out in Chicopee, Massachusetts. John Barrett sells presses. He's full of good advice. Again, lockdown is an issue there right now, but he ships, he sends, you know, and he usually has stuff available. eBay. I've bought presses off of eBay. I've got, you know, for very short money. It's, you know, and you can find, you know, I mean, if you keep an eye on eBay, you'll find stuff in your neighborhood, and sometimes they come up very cheap. Craigslist. Presses pop up on Craigslist. Sometimes for very short money again, or even free. People don't know what they have. They're just trying to get rid of it. If you keep an eye on Craigslist, they might pop up. And of course, Facebook groups, you know, just if you really want a press, you know what you're looking for, just put out a call saying, I'm looking for this thing. People are sitting on stuff. They're, you know, they're around. It's not, you know, finding exactly what you might want might be hard, but if you have kind of a general idea what you're looking for, you can come up with it. So those are some places to find a press. Let's talk a little bit about condition. If you're looking to buy a press, you can go and buy one that someone has completely restored. People are out there doing beautiful work, and they've fixed them up, got new rollers, they're ready to print. And if you have the money, that's a great thing. But, you know, a fully restored press is going to cost a certain amount of money. You know, people put time and energy and, you know, parts and labor into it. So, you know, that's going to be your, you know, your safest, but your most expensive route. You know, you can get presses out there that are already running. People have been using them, haven't necessarily been restored, but they're operating. You know, might be a little bit less than a fully restored press, you know, which may have been made a lot prettier, but that's fine too. There's what I call seized up and filthy. And this is a lovely condition to find a press in. You know, it may have been in a barn, in a garage. I have an example I'll show you outside. You know, someone's always the cellar, always the basement, never on the ground floor. If they were on the ground floor, someone would have got them already. You know, this is where you're really going to find a bargain. You can find presses that, you know, look really terrible, but I'll show you some tricks to evaluate them. And, you know, if it's just a matter of putting in the work to clean up the rust, clean up the old ink, fix a few, you know, bits and pieces, you can get a really nice press for not a lot of money. And then there's the last condition, which is really busted. That's the one you don't want. And it can be difficult to tell the difference between really busted and seized up and filthy. I have a few bits of advice as far as that goes, but that's the one you want to avoid. Anyone have any questions or comments or what have you?
So Mitchell, I would just add, I found both of my presses on Facebook Marketplace, which is slightly different than the Facebook groups. Mm-hmm. And the way that I was able to find those is I put in a keyword search, I think I put in letterpress or printing press, maybe both. And then I set a range around me that was, you know, 200 miles. And so every time something with those keywords popped up, it notified me. And it was a really efficient way for me to find them. And, you know, similar to what you described, the folks that had them didn't necessarily know what their condition was. So I was taking a risk, you know, going to get a press that we weren't 100% sure was going to actually work, but it looked like they might. But I got a really nice deal on both of them because of that. And it was a great way to find a press for me.
Yeah, Craigslist is really, and just kind of putting the word out. You know, I mean, if you're any kind of an antiques person, or you know friends who are antiques persons, I bought this press, this Golding number 8, extremely rare. There's only like 250 of them made, in a antique store, you know, one of these big factory space, you know, antique mall sorts of places, for very short money. I think I paid, I'm not going to tell you what I paid, but it wasn't much, because I didn't know what it was. You know, they weren't, you know, if they'd been someone who was into letterpress printing, they might have had a sense of the value of it, but they didn't. But my brother-in-law does that kind of, you know, antique stuff, and he spotted them. Speaking of Craigslist, you might see all this wonderful Mixmaster ink. I got all that by paying attention to Craigslist. Someone just wanted to get rid of a bunch of ink, and it's great ink. Pressing on. I have a note here about moving presses. I'm not going to talk about moving presses. I've moved and helped move a lot of presses. The only thing I'm going to say is get help. Do not, even a little press, even a little tabletop press is a heavy thing for one person. You know, the smallest press is at least a 2-person job. If it's a floor standing press, I'd really advise you to find someone who's adept at moving heavy pieces of equipment, because you can get yourself in deep really quickly, hurt yourself, hurt the press. Yeah, I mean, it can be done. It's not difficult. Well, I shouldn't say it's not. It is difficult, but it's doable. But if you haven't moved a press, get help. That's what I say there. So repairability. So when you're looking at a press, you know, how are you telling the difference between totally busted and potentially repairable? You know, what can be going wrong with it? So we can look at a couple of presses here. These are presses I've restored. This is a Golding Pearl number 8. This is a Golding Pearl number 11. What goes wrong? Okay, if you look back here, this ink ratchet thing, and this is what I'm saying is true of Goldings, but they're going to be true of tabletops. They're going to be true of Chandler and Prices. They all have similar issues as far as this goes. These are often screwed up and busted. You can see this one actually has been repaired. I don't know if you can see the repair. It's an old repair. These arms, that hold up the feed tray, almost always, this is unusual, never been broken. This one, you can see, been broken. Those are very often broken. This throw-off lever here, and the brake lever, very often broken and repaired, or broken and not repaired. The gripper system, that's this business in here, and here. Often missing grippers, often missing pieces, missing springs. The roller hooks here, the roller hooks are often injured, missing springs, missing pieces. The treadle, you can see your treadle mechanism here and here. A lot of times these were motorized and they didn't have a treadle. And the ink disc. The ink disc is sometimes missing or injured. These are all very typical things. And they're not fatal, right? I mean, they're almost expected. There's ways to work around them, to replace parts, to repair parts. And if they've been broken and repaired, you know, you don't need to be overly concerned. It's really just kind of part of dealing with pieces of equipment that are, you know, 100 years or more old. They have issues. And they can be repaired. We'll talk a little bit later. I'll talk about how to deal about repairing them if they need to be repaired or even replaced. Question?
Yeah, Mitch. Do you have any tips about how do you know if a part is missing? What are some resources to find things like parts lists or diagrams?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah. You know, there's a couple things you can, and that's, yeah, broken parts are not easy to deal with, but can be dealt with. Missing parts are a lot harder. One, because you don't necessarily know they're missing. Two, you don't have one for someone to either repair or make another one that looks just like it. The first thing I'd really recommend is, if possible, familiarize yourself with the style of press before you go out to buy it. Not always possible. We don't necessarily know other printers, or you might not be in a place where there are resources, but often there are. If you can find a letterpress printer, a letterpress shop, a lot of times they're perfectly happy to have a visitor, and they'll let you look at stuff. There are resources like like the Museum of Printing, like the Makerspace here in Lynn, Brickyard Collaborative, where we have a small letterpress shop. We have a Reflex Letterpress. He actually does classes and lessons in upstate New York. There's Flower City Book Arts in Western New York. There's Western New York Book Arts, Winnieback. So there's places to go and look at them. There's lots of online videos. And the thing is, for a tabletop or a floor model platen press, they're all pretty much the same. There's of course there's big differences, in terms of how the treadles work and how the gearing works. But those, if you have problems there, then you have a really big problem. For the smaller stuff, like the rollers and the hooks and the gripper mechanisms, all that stuff, they're all pretty much they're all very very similar from press to press. So if you're looking at a press and stuff is just plain old not there that you expect, like a gripper system, or there's a place where there should be a roller hook and there isn't one, that should give you some pause. But it's not necessarily fatal. Again, things can be recreated, and people do have piles of parts depending on how popular a press was. You might get lucky and be able to buy something. So did that answer your question, or was it too long-winded?
Sure. Do you think it's worth staying away from the more uncommon presses then? Or
well,
because they're more fun?
There's a sense that they're all uncommon, right? At this point, they're hundreds they're 100 years old, many of them. For like common golding, like this Pearl 3, that's a press they made a lot of. There's a lot of people love them. There's communities of people who support them. So yeah, it's a little safer to go with presses people know. Kelsey's for the desktop, and Craftsman, and some of the bigger names. But if the press is in good shape, definitely don't be afraid of it. Mm-hmm. If it's a really weird press and it's in really crappy shape, yeah, maybe. Or maybe that's the argument that you just get to have it for free, and or give them $100.
Be more of an adventure.
Exactly right. You can just say it's like this is going to be, I'll give you $100 to save it from scrap. Which a lot of people, when a lot of times these presses, they belong to people's dads and uncles and in-laws and friends who bought a property, and they don't want to sell it for scrap iron. They want to go to a good home. So people are kind of happy to make it happen. So that's all of those little bits and pieces can be dealt with. Where you really start to have problems are in the larger repairs. So, and I'll show you something outside. So, for instance, in this press, if you're looking right here, you can see that weld, kind of right in the leg, right through this part here. That's pretty bad. But it's also very old, and whoever made the repair did a beautiful job long before my time. And it works, right? So even a really bad piece of injury that's long repaired, not necessarily too much of a problem. This press over here, it's hard to see, but it suffered a very bad break right through here at one time They completely remade it, re-sleeved it, and it runs like a top. So, when you find those really old, bad but repaired issues, you can cope with it. It's not ideal, but it's also an opportunity to try and knock the price down. If you're looking at it and go, hey, what's that big break there? But sometimes those breaks are just really bad. Anything that's happening in here in the platen, or in the bed, or in the main frame, if you have an active piece of damage there that hasn't been not an old repair, yeah, I'd stay away from that. You can repair anything, but it's going to cost you a lot of money, potentially way more than the press is worth. But there's still things you can do. We'll get to that in a little bit. So the other thing to do is, I have a note here, advice, right? And Dora, you've certainly engaged in this just recently. You get a press, you get working on it, you get stuck. Who do you talk to? There's lots of people to talk to. There's the Facebook groups. We talked about Press. People are happy. It's a wonderful, tight, close-knit community. Of many printers, all of whom are 100% right, and very few agree with each other. So, you'll find an opinion that you can work with if you ask. John Falstrom, by the way, if you're into Goldings, Google John Falstrom. He is the man, knows everything. We'll answer all your questions. Paul Moxon for Vandercooks, literally wrote the book. I think it's in its 3rd edition. A wonderful book and a very personable guy. Press is good. The other thing to do, and I strong, is I wrote make a book, and what we have here is my book. This is my book of letterpress research. So what I do is, as I'm researching my presses, I'm copying things out. There's a wonderful resource for Goldings where online you can get this, every Golding for every year. The factory logbook is here. Inland Printer is full of cool stuff if you can get access to that. You can find parts lists and diagrams, and these old illustrations can be super useful. So yeah, the internet's a wonderful thing, but out in the shop with your greasy fingers, it's nice to have a book. And you can find the original manuals for these things. That from where they were a million years ago. There's my my glider saw, right? So find stuff and bookmark it at least, but maybe even print it out.
Mitchell, just to add, for those of you guys that are doing tabletop presses, I have Kelsey's, and I have found Excelsior Press online to be an incredible resource for tabletops in general. So if you're short on space and you need a smaller press, that's a great place to start. He has most of the manuals for tabletop presses available in PDF, so you can download them and print them like Mitchell has provided. And then lastly, I would echo what Mitchell says. Everybody that I've engaged with in the letterpress community has been so wonderful. I'm kind of here by myself in Houston in a way, and have asked a ton of questions, and I've never, knock on wood, had anybody say, go away, you're bugging me. Everybody's just been so helpful and or to point me in the right direction of someone who can. So this is a welcoming community for sure.
Very much so, yeah. I mean, there's lots of people who are just really enthusiastic about keeping the art alive, and will certainly help you.
Hey, Mitchell.
Yep.
Rob Miller here. You might want to talk briefly about the issue with missing beds and ink discs on tabletop presses, and the huge problem with those, and kind of why to avoid them.
Rob, why don't you take that? Because you have a theory. Let's hear it.
Yeah, I would say don't buy a Kelsey that's missing a bed or an ink disc. The parts have just gotten impossible to find. And I see a post on Facebook or Firepress once a month, someone begging for those parts, and they just fundamentally don't exist anymore.
Yeah, Kelsey chases are a problem too.
So I have an idea actually. So Todd over at, I think it's Todd's Pressworks. I can send you guys the link if you need it. He actually recently made one for me. He is an excellent welder. It fits beautifully into my Kelsey, no problem at all. And my understanding is that he can make most press pieces for small tabletop presses. So
Yeah, chases for sure are easy to come up with just with metal, but we're talking about the actual chase bed on a Kelsey they're removable. And
I think he can make that as well. If I'm not mistaken, he can make those as well.
He might be able to. They just become very expensive.
Yes,
that's a fairly complicated
piece
of machining. A bed is a very complicated thing. I would imagine that the chases are fairly easy comparatively. The ink discs are possible, but less difficult than the beds. I agree. I would stay away from any press that was missing a bed. If you know a good machinist or blacksmith or both, but preferably both, they might be able to make you an ink disc.
Yeah, in fact, if you look at my notes, which you can almost can't, so I have stuff that might need fixing and stuff you can't fix. An ink disc is on both sides of that list.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can get lucky, sometimes you can't. I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit to show you my little ink disc problem. So this is my Golden Curl 3. This is it's probably the second press I ever bought, maybe the third. It's a beautiful press and in really nice shape. You know, it has some little issues, nothing severe. But the ink disc, when I got it, flopped around like crazy. And the reason for that was it didn't fit right. And the reason, according to John Falstrom, that it didn't fit right is because this is a very, very early Model 3. And they weren't interchangeable parts. Basically, at that time, Golding, they'd make one and then they'd make another one, and the engineer would, fuss with that, and then he'd make another one. So at one point, the ink discs were swapped around. So what I had to do, here, hold a second. So what you'll see I ended up having to do is I went to a machinist, I tried to, see what they could tell me. And we ended up, they lent me a tool called a hand reamer. And I opened up that, the hole where the ink disc goes wide enough so that it would accept a nylon bushing that fits in there that would seat my ink disc tightly. So for many days watching television, I sat there with that hand reamer, taking a few thousandths of an inch off of this until everything fit together just perfectly. Which, just by the way, I can show you a hand reamer. That's what this is. This one I got for this press. It's 1.5 inches to bore out this shaft, which, as I said before, they'd repaired, and it was fine. It was a motorized press, and it was incredibly tight. You couldn't treadle it. So in order to treadle it, I had to disassemble this and ream out the platen shaft, hole until it was loose enough that you could get a nice, nice action out of it. So you do have to be prepared to go to some extremes. So let's touch on. I have my agenda here. So let's talk for a moment about levels of restoration, and that's basically just your goal. Like, what are you trying to do? There are certainly people out there who restore these presses. They take them apart down to the molecular level. They strip all the paint off, they paint them or even powder coat them, fix all the broken bits, smooth all the smoothed off bits, repaint them, repaint the pinstripes, and put them back together, and those things are factory fresh. And it's wonderful, but it's not me. You're going to pay a lot of money for one of those presses. If you don't mind paying a lot of money, it's going to be totally worth it, because people are at that level of restoration are doing wonderful work. You know, you can make it pretty. You know, this is a press I would call has been made a little pretty. I stripped all the paint. It's been cleaned up. Parts have been fixed. You know, there's even a little bit of gold highlighting here and there, and that's fine. Or you can just get them to print. You know, this press, it just prints. It's not pretty. It's not cleaned up. Although I did clean up that bad. Isn't that pretty? You know, this press too, it just prints. You know, I haven't made any particular effort to fix it up. I haven't repainted the beautiful work down here. So, you know, you just kind of want to have that in your head when you start, how far you're going to go with this. So let's go take a look outside. I wanted to show you in terms of presses that, you know, the kind of conditions you find them and the stuff you're going to do and some of the things to think about. These are two Golding Pearl Model 11s. They're both the improved style of press, which you can sort of see from the body type. This one here on the right is one that I've been working on. It was painted a ghastly color. If you look at the bed, you can see in the shaft here, it was painted these really awful greens and reds, and they painted the springs. I think like a kid painted it, honestly. All the little bits have been, they need to be cleaned up. So there's a couple things that I really strongly recommend you do if you're going to work on a press. One, get a plastic bin of some sort, cardboard box, something with a nice strong bottom, and put all your parts into the bin, because you know, this is going to take longer than you thought, and you're not going to remember where you put stuff. And the other thing I recommend, plastic bag, all those little pieces, the screws, the nuts, the bolts, you know, they're all still painted that horrible red. Put them in a bag. Then, you know, then they don't wander away. The other thing you really, really want to do is take a lot of pictures, right? You know, get a bright light on it, put the light on your camera, on your phone, and take pictures of every little thing. Get in tight details, long shots. And do videos of the mechanisms. It's 6 later, you'll go put it back together, and you simply, it's like, just go this way or that way. You won't remember. Lots of photos. So just looking at these presses, so this, as I say, this one's sort of in process. You know, once I'm finished stripping all this paint, we'll paint that up, clean it up. It's been under a tarp outside, so it's got a little rust on it, but it's in pretty solid shape. It had, just show you a little bit of some of the weird damage you might see. You can see here, see these, these grazes here and here. And if you go to this side, you can see a little bit of damage here and here. Almost certainly someone turned that press on with the bales standing up, and it popped out 2 chunks of metal on both sides of the platen, which isn't not, you know, that's really something you can live with and deal with. I actually found another platen that I'm using instead. This press I got for free. It's literally in the shape. I got it out of a barn in Vermont. And look at this crazy repair. This is all it. You know, you can see there's a really dreadful break right through the main pivot there. But it worked. Look, there's nails in it. There's shims in it. Can this press be restored to full functionality? I don't know. See, same repair on the other side. If it hadn't been free, I probably wouldn't have been taken. I wouldn't have taken it. But for free, this is a lovely pile of parts, if nothing else. And it does have the. Say again.
Do you mind if I ask you? So I work in a historical museum with some presses. We have a couple that have some significant welds, often at big knuckle joints. They're not in use, and I wondered, is it true that you cannot actually adequately repair a press that has been welded at a joint? Is that? I don't know enough about repairs.
It's a cause of concern, but it is not fatal. As to say, like this press here, that's a big weld right at a critical joint. Prints like a charm. This press here, it's hard to see, but there's right back in here, big weld, really critical part. Back in the day, people really knew how to weld, as far as I can tell. They could braze these things up and keep them running. I've had less luck in the modern era, finding people who can, do that kind of welding. I've had better luck with machinists repairing parts than welders, but I just may not have found the right welder.
So you might want to look for a blacksmith.
Good, yeah, I like that. Blacksmith would definitely work.
Because you're talking about cast iron, which is an entirely different animal than steel.
Exactly.
And, I have a friend who's a blacksmith. Luckily, he can repair just about anything. But there are some things he's very hesitant to repair. Cast iron is one of them. In theory, you should heat the cast iron up before you weld it, and almost welding temperature. So you can braze it, which is a different process, not as strong as a weld. But again, if someone knows their way around metal, they can do wonders.
Yes. This is the treadle to this press, the original treadle, and you see all this like funny work in here. This was a friend of mine who is like a really superior metalsmith. I'll spare you all the incredible steps that he went through trying to fix this and gave up. Ultimately couldn't make it work. It's a very stress point. So the treadle that's actually on this press I had remade. So moving into that end of the discussion. So yeah, they've been repairing. Although to answer the question, in my opinion, if it's an old repair, it seems like it's that repair was in play for a good long time, it's probably okay. Those old timers knew what they were doing. These presses were running shops, with their own metalsmiths and repair specialists, and they could make this stuff work. I have a press that we restored, a Golding Jobber 6 for the Brickyard Collaborative, and it had a terrible break right in the arm of the platen, a break that I would have said was completely fatal. Except one of our Makerspace members is, a master metalsmith who makes a living restoring, $1 million vintage automobiles, and he fixed it, and he fixed it beautifully. Welded it in some sense back together, and it is strong and functioning today. So it can be done. And if you have access to a makerspace in your where you live, I would make them your friends, because the kind of stuff you're going to need to fix these presses is the kind of stuff those guys love doing. So we have people in there who are brilliant with metal and fabricating parts, and they might be able to fix something that seems kind of hopeless, or remake a part that you can't find anywhere else. So oh yeah, I always want to mention these furniture dollies. All of my presses are on these dollies. They're like $20 at Harbor Freight or whatever. I highly recommend them, because these presses are heavy as heck, and you don't want to be pushing them around. Particularly Goldings. The real problem, the thing people like about Goldings, as opposed to the Chandler and Prices, is their very small footprints, right? They take up very little room in your shop, and we're really tight for space, most of us. But what that means is they're wicked top heavy. Super easy to knock them over and hurt yourself or shatter the press. It's worth pointing out that cast iron might be strong, but it sure is brittle, and you don't want to hear that sound. So any other questions before I move on a little bit?
The other thing you could do is find somebody who does sand casting and have borrow a part from someone and take it over and have it sand cast.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because here, in fact, we have one. These are a pair of treadles for the 11 that we just saw outside, cast from a Golding 11 treadle part. And there's a foundry in Rhode Island, Cumberland Foundry, if anyone's sort of in the greater New England area. They do very nice work, very inexpensively, comparatively speaking. But basically, I took them, I borrowed a treadle, had them make a casting of it, and that's what that is. I did the same thing for this press. This is a recast treadle. The one thing you have to remember is that sand casting, the metal shrinks about 1/8 of an inch over a foot. So, the original form for these parts was actually a little bigger than the part, and it shrunk back down. So if you're starting with a part, it's going to be a little bit smaller, which comes into play in terms of how the treadle operates. If this press wasn't on runners, the treadle would hit the floor every time I pumped it, because of that difference. The other thing you have to keep in mind is, so I had these cast, but you'll see if you look at the ends here, right? There's no holes to do the mounting. You have to find a machinist who can take that casting and do the finish work on it so that you can actually use it on the press. I have a retired guy up in New Hampshire who does fantastic work inexpensively. And that's, as far as treadles go too, there's people making them. You don't have to recast one. You can fabricate one. Again, your maker spaces are a good resource there. So let's look at tools a little bit. If you're going to work on a press, you're going to need tools. And this is my this is my press tool. I mean, mostly these are just the regular tools you'd expect to find. Dikes and wrenches, pliers, hammers, all that stuff. There's a few things, though, that I find particularly useful that I reach for all the time. I just thought I'd walk you through some of my favorite tools. And this here is number one. This is a gear puller. It's actually part of a gear puller set that lets you do different configurations of the gear puller. Getting these flywheels off, that can be, oh boy, that can be a real problem sometimes. Sometimes they pop right off. Sometimes they require persuasion. Sometimes you have to get in here and these end up being mushroomed more often than you think they should be. So sometimes you have to sand the edges down on those, because just a little bit of mushrooming will really cause you grief. You know, these are can be very expensive, so they're better off finding someone to borrow one from. But I recommend it. You know, wrenches, adjustable wrenches. I love these screwdrivers with multiple bits, because when you're lying on the floor underneath the press trying to get something off, it's handy to have the right screwdriver with you. These are super useful. This is a drift set I found in my father was an engineer. This is a set of punches, drift punches that, you know, a lot of the bits and pieces of these presses are just stuck together with pins, right? So you have like these little pins holding these springs in. There's pins holding gears in. There's even just getting nuts and bolts out sometimes that have been sitting there for 100 years, giving them a little tap. Super useful. Headset light. You know, you can get these for, you know, 10 or 15 bucks at the big box store. You know, they're, you know, it's gloomy in here. The presses are all black. They're covered with black ink and grease. Having a light that you can really see what you're doing is fantastic. This is a $10 digital caliper I got at Harbor Freight. Super handy. You know, sometimes you need to figure out how big that shaft is, or, you know, how big that hole is to, you know, find a piece for it. A big persuader with a rubber, you know, choice of rubber ends. You don't want to hit cast iron with a steel hammer. You'll crack it and break it. But sometimes you need to give it a little bit of persuasion. You know, having a nice rubberized handle is a fine thing. Set of files, you know, round files, corner, you know, again, you can get these pretty cheap at the big box store or wherever. But you'll need to file stuff off and get it to fit, you know, particularly if you're getting new parts, new old parts, you're having stuff cast. Sometimes you need to get in there and make some adjustments. The big honking screwdriver. Get yourself some leverage to get things to pop off. Very useful. The little stubby screwdriver. There's a lot of screws in there that you just can't get at otherwise. It's nice to have a nice set of needle noses. I inherited this from somebody, but they're super useful. You know, just kind of a smattering of stuff that I think is going to help you there. Any questions, or, you know, folks that are out there who are doing their own restorations, any particular tools that you're really into that you'd like to pop out?
So we were talking earlier about how to get rust off, and you mentioned your favorite tool is it a buffer? Is that what you called it?
Well, I have a few. We'll move over to the cleaning stuff here. So those are my disassembly tools. Let's look at your surface management tools. Yeah, these things are rusty. They're always rusty. And how do you get that rust off? There are chemical, you know, you can get these, must for rust and things, you know, chemical treatments that'll take the rust off. I don't like them. I have used them. I don't find they're that efficacious, and they're super toxic for the most part. Dory was telling me that she's doing a vinegar soak right now. I think that can work really well. You know, people tell me about Coca-Cola. I've never tried that one. You know, mostly it's elbow grease. You know, various scrapers. You know, ink knives do nicely as scrapers. You know, other scrapers. Razor blades, right? Your single edge razor blade is a really useful tool. You know, when you're trying to clean up things like, you you know, the bed or the planting or the rails. You know, you can get in there with a razor blade and really clean them up nicely. My favorite tool is the wire wheel. You know, I mean, all of these little bits and small pieces, I'll take them down to the cellar, or at the museum, you know, we'll take them over to the wire wheel, and you know, they'll clean up in a jiffy. I think these little sets of steel, brass, plastic brushes you can get at the big box store are handy for getting in there. These are something you find in the plumbing section. I don't know exactly what you call them, but they're plumbers' brushes for cleaning. You know, if you're doing you know, soldering, you know, on a plumbing, this is used for cleaning it out. And what these are really handy for is getting into places, you know, like these shafts here, or these areas here. So you've taken all that stuff apart, but you want to clean up inside of these shafts. These kind of brushes are nice for that.
You can get those at the like an HVAC supplier down
Yep.
to like a 32nd of an inch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oops. Yeah, those are, you know, those are really handy because, you know, I mean, Dory, we were talking earlier about your, you were having trouble with your roller hooks.
Yeah.
Not being bouncy, right? Because these things need to move very smoothly.
Right.
Because if they hang up, you can actually pop the roller out, and the roller falls into the press, and you can actually break the press that way. We've done it at the museum. It's a horrible feeling. Cotton swabs, again, nice for cleaning out the inside. If you snip the end off, even at a little angle, they're actually really good for getting in here and you know, cleaning up your oil holes. You can kind of smoosh them around in there, and you know, you'll see they'll clean up your lubrication holes, because they get messy. A mask, even in, you know, before the COVID era, it's like, if you're doing wire wheeling, if you're using these chemicals, if you're doing scraping, wear a mask, because you'll be blowing ugly snots for days, and it's not good. Gloves are a good idea too if you're working with any of these caustic cleaning products. We'll look at those in a minute. You know, I like to have a nice assortment of sandpaper. You know, in the very fine polishing grits. You know, 1,000, 1,500, 800. You know, if you're doing like the ink disc and the platen and the bed, that's you know, those are good tools for that. You know, just to have handy. So steel wool. You know, there's an inclination to use steel wool. You know, it's, you know, elbow grease and steel wool cleaned a lot of things. I don't like steel wool if I can avoid it. And the reason is that if you grind away, you know, if you're cleaning up with steel wool, it tends to shed little bits of steel wool. And if you're doing that on the body of the press, you know, that steel wool is getting everywhere. You know, it's getting into your ink holes, it's getting into the joints, it's getting into the, you know, everything. So I try to avoid it. You know, there's times when it's kind of needed. What I do like are these scrubber things. These are the same kind of things, you know, you'll find in, you know, your grocery store for cleaning the pots and pans. They have them in the big box stores in much tougher grades. You know, these things will really do a number on cleaning off rust and you know, ookiness. You know, they're a little, you know, they're not terribly expensive, but they don't last as long as like a bag of steel wool. But I like them. It's nice to have some stiff brushes. This is a brush I got at let's see, Joe, you've started screen sharing. How are we doing? Can people still see me? I can't see anybody anymore.
Joe, I think you are sharing your screen.
And your puppy.
And your puppy, yes.
Yeah, a darling puppy. Okay, so we've resolved that. Give me just a second to get back, and there you go. Okay, we can see you now.
Okay. Yeah, that is one of those Zoom annoyances. So I have over here my an assortment of stuff that I use in the process, including the polar seltzer. So can everyone see everything okay? Dory, I can kind of just see you, but okay. So this is your big box store orange cleaner. I've had good success cleaning, stripping paint with that. If you need to strip paint, I'm sure people have their own preferences. WD-40 is a perennial favorite for loosening things up. Comes in various flavors. This blaster is a product that people swear by. I certainly use it. If you've got frozen parts, that might help break them up. Sometimes you might get a press where nothing's moving. My friend Craig has bought presses that way and just sprayed them with the blaster every few days for like a year, and they opened up.
Is that a lubricant, Mitchell?
Yeah, it's like a penetrating lubricant. It's standard big box store stuff, PV blaster. A lot of these are a little bit, some people really hate some of these things just because they are kind of toxic. I try and be, I go both ways, if I'm used to it. This is something called Murnell Big Bite. We love it over there at the Museum of Printing, but boy, is it strong. It's a detergent degreaser in its pure form. It'll take paint off of stuff, but it's the bomb on cleaning stuff. I use it in a sprayer at half strength, and even that's pretty darn strong. You have to find in a specialty store. We do sell it at the museum, or at least we used to. You might find, if you're like a machinist or an HVAC kind of place, they might have this in stock. There's these sorts of Goo Gone and Goof Off kind of stuff. They can be handy for, some of the hardcore stuff. In terms of painting, I'm going to give you, this is a John Falstrom trick. So I asked John one day, I'm working on a press. It's like, John, how am I going to, there's some parts that I have to paint, but I don't want to paint everything, right? Like these kind of base press parts, they're a real pain in the neck to paint unless you strip them all down. And his solution that he uses is Rust-Oleum Satin Black and Rust-Oleum Satin Clear. And what you do is you spray on the black, and before it's dry, spray on the clear. And that gives you a finish. That's really what this finish is. And, it's kind of hard to tell this way, but, it's a little bit dull. It's certainly not very shiny, but it's not shiny. It's pretty authentic. So if you're, this is original, this is new, it's not bad, so I think that's a good trick. Mineral oil is, once you've actually gotten everything done and cleaned up and, you've got it all back together, get some steel wool. I know I said not to use it, but you're not scrubbing with it. You just use some steel wool, soak it in the mineral oil, rub the whole press gently all over. It just makes it look pretty. And it will provide some rust protection and everything. And in terms of, once your press is sort of up and restored, just a couple of hints. This is something called Ink Guard anti-skimming stuff. This is, you would use this, if you're doing like hand inking and you want to hold your ink for a little while, or, oil painters use this to hold their palette. What I find is if if you can like give your beds and ink discs just a quick spritz with that, keeps them from rusting in the shop, you know, if you walk away for a week or two. The Putz pomade, also very good. You know, if you clean up with that once in a while, it'll help keep your rollers nice and fresh. So all of that's pretty good. And also in terms of cleaning products, I really can't recommend this stuff, the Super Soap, enough. You know, if you're doing a lot of this press restoration and also printing and getting your hands inky, you really need to be cleaning up a lot. And this stuff is really mild on the hands, and it does an excellent job cleaning, like that orange, you know, orange lava soap, whatever you get from the big box store. It's really rough on my hands. This stuff is, you can get this from NA Graphics, and I know Fritz is doing a talk here in a little bit. But this is also a nice thing. Tubbo towels, or as apparently some people call it, turbo towels. Big box store stuff. You know, out in my shop, I don't have any water. So if I need to wash up in the middle of a print job, or, you know, want to clean up a part, or just clean up my hands in between working on a press, really handy, cheap, and also, you know, not hard on the hands. So that's all the cleaning and stuff. So yeah, let's just talk a little bit at the end here about broken and missing parts. Unless anyone has anyone have any questions or cleaning comments, or, you know, their own favorite products, or they hate my products.
I
do.
Another cleaning product is scrubbing bubbles. It removes ink from cuts, you know, 20-year-old ink. It'll remove the ink off the cuts, and it will remove the ink off your press, but it does have water in it, so you have to clean it fairly quickly to keep the rust down.
Good hint.
I found
like
that
to propose,
paste wax is a good finish.
I'm sorry, we had two at once there. Something about wax?
I found that paste wax is a good finish to prevent rusts in the long term, you know, on the large unused surfaces of the press.
Yeah, that sounds good.
How do you apply that?
With a rag, like you would, you know, normal, like on a car or something like that. You know, when you're waxing your car, you put it on, you let it dry for whatever the type of paste wax you're getting suggests, and then you buff it out, and it gives a nice shine and protects it against rust and other moisture, and makes ink cleaning off of surfaces, if you want, a little bit easier too.
It also makes your paper cutter deck a lot easier to use. It also makes it a little slippery, which makes it easier to use. I was saying before that Paul Moxon is very fond of something called Never Dull.
Oh, right.
Which is a wadding compound for cleaning bare metal. It polishes it up, and it actually leaves a small protective film on it. You have a can of it around there?
You know, I thought I did, but I've got. Yeah, I do. Yeah, there it is. Here's the Never Dull.
Yes.
I think because Paul recommended it. I forgot to pull it out.
Yeah, open it up and show people what's inside.
Right, it's weird stuff.
Yeah.
Oh.
It looks like cotton balls.
Yeah.
And how do you use that?
Say again?
How do you use that?
Yeah, you just kind of rub it on.
You can basically take a small hand, fingerful of one of the wads, rub it on the metal, and it cleans it. It cleans it up.
Oh. Yep, that's good stuff. Anyone else have any favorite products or devices?
I have a question.
Okay.
What is your process for taking rust off an ink disc?
Sort of twofold. I mean, if mostly I'll take that to the wire wheel, and you know, because a lot of times the ink disc, you know, like the face of it will be super rusty, and the back of it will be super caked up with old ink. You know, and the wire wheel will really take that off. Razor blades are another good tool there. You know, you could really just get busy with the razor blade and scrape that down.
It won't scratch the surface of the ink disc?
Not really. At least I haven't found that to be an issue. And you know, the surface will take a certain amount of injury. You know, I mean, I've gotten ink discs that have been you know, very neglected. You know, like they've been left for literally decades. With you know, you can even see it here, right? You can see where the rollers were left on that disc for, you know, forever and ever and ever. And sometimes that can be really bad. You can get some pitting there, and sometimes, you know, you just get sort of like weird random scratches. But you know, I've just found that mostly they don't show up in the print, you know, because your roller's passing over that whole ink disc. So you know, a little bit of unevenness isn't enough to interfere with the operation. Yeah, I mean, this one you can see has some you know, some gouging on it. But yeah, no, I have not really, you know, I mean, I think one of the first presses I had, I immediately applied some heavy sandpaper to it and scratched the heck out of it. And I was very sorry about that. And spent a long time trying to get those scratches out. And I mostly did, but that press, you know, has scratches in it to this day. And it doesn't actually seem to affect it. But, you know, it's a little tabletop press, so they're going to do it too.
There's another trick. If it's a really badly pitted disc, have a machinist put it in the lathe and turn it clean. Basically, take the top level of metal off, and they can polish it to different degrees. But mine is not polished; works just fine. It'll polish over time with the rollers.
Yep. Yeah,
So,
your Putz Pomade helps that a little bit as well.
On your sandpaper, you can start with a palm sander at like 120 and then go up in grits through 200, 300, 400, 500 and get a really fine finish on it and get it clean really quickly, opposed to all the dust you get off of the wire wheel.
Oh yeah, the wire wheel can be really gruesome. I mean, one thing you can do too is, you know, you can take a little piece of furniture, you know, wrap it in your fine grits, and you know, you can do some buffing that way as well. Yeah, I mean, the good news is that the ink discs, you know, will run with you know, will operate just fine with a certain amount of injury to them. But yeah, I like that idea of taking them and having them polished up by a machinist if it's really been neglected. You know, some of these things have been in the barn for a million years, and they show their age.
And Mitchell, if there's not enough material to take down or the machinist is worried about it, you can also have them nickel plated. There's a lot of, especially here in the Midwest, there's a lot of tool and die shops that can do that. And then from there, you can machine them down and not change your thickness, if that's a concern on the press. And
I like the sound of nickel plating. That'd be pretty. Cool.
So if you take 20 thousandths off, let's say, do you need to put a washer underneath it to raise it back up 20 thousandths?
On most platen presses, no.
Okay.
It's more of an issue on presses with ink fountains when you're resurfacing the fountain rollers or something like that, the steel rollers.
Right.
You know, like a Heidelberg or like a larger cylinder press that has metal ink fountains. You can't change the outer dimension. With platen presses, they're kind of sloppy anyway. So you're by taking, you know, 20 or even 30 thousandths off, it's not going to make a difference as long as you got the material there to work with.
Right. Now, it's worth that. It does remind me that, you know, one thing you may need to think about are the rails. If the rails are really worn, sometimes you may need to put tape on them to get the rollers up to the proper height. And, you know, I've seen various ways people have sort of managed that. Some, you know, with tape. I've seen, you know, sort of metal applied to it even. That's something that you might have to.
Aluminum furnace tape works really, really well if you have really bad rails.
Yeah. I mean, some of these presses have had a lot of use. So, some, you know, back in the day, they might have replaced some of these parts, but these days we're making do. Okay, so that's sort of your cleaning stuff. The last thing I wanted to talk about, although we've kind of been talking about it all along, are just broken and missing parts. So we've talked about using, using foundry parts. We've talked about, chases. Sometimes you'll find broken chases. You can sort of tell if you hear that. That doesn't sound so good, right? So you can, this one's actually even marked broken. You can take those to a good welder, and they can fix those. You find a lot of repaired chases. If you have a good machinist, you can find that's really fantastic, because you'll see, sometimes you just, like these, like gripper fingers and roller hooks. Sometimes they're really worn, and it's a pretty simple part. You can have them made if you can't find one specifically for your press. Even these, I've had these made. These sort of two-part roller hooks. So as long as you have something to show them, they can usually work with that. And you see a lot of improvisational repairs on these too. For even this, that screw is that's a wood screw. People you see a lot of wood screws jammed into those particular holes for some reason. And people, Todd's press time. Todd does make chases. Museum of Printing has them. Letterpress Things has them. So chases can be found or made if in a pinch. And as I say, if you've got a makerspace nearby, give them a call, because those guys love doing this kind of stuff. And they'll either help you out or point you to the right person. So that's kind of everything on my agenda for this. I don't know if there's anything we've left out, or if people have any comments, or I know we've got people in the audience who really know what the heck they're doing. So I'd love to open it up for any other additional comments or discussion.
I have a question.
Sorry.
Oh, I was wondering if you could go back to the two-part roller hook thing. And I have, it feels like it's way stiffer on my press, and I'm wondering what to do about that.
So the when you say stiffer,
the spring, the action is just really stiff.
Well, the first thing to really, we'll go look at it over on this press. You want to make sure that everything is super lubricated, and we'll come around this side because you can really see it here. This all comes apart very quite easily. So take the rollers out.
Hey Mitchell, turn your camera a little to the right so we can see the spring.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Okay, that's better.
So yeah, if you look down at the end, at least on Goldings, and I think this is true of C&Ps and most presses, is there's a little pin here. Am I pointing at the pin? Yeah. If you pull that out, that will that'll release the spring mechanism. Those springs will also like to fly across the room too. So
Okay.
maybe put a piece of tape on them first. So.
Yeah, I guess mine are way more rusty than that. So should I try to repair them, or is that something that you can I could find fairly easily? Is it special for press, or is any spring sort of?
Well, the first thing I would do is just take everything apart, clean it really thoroughly, clean inside these holes.
Okay.
Buff up if you've got a wire wheel or even a wire brush, just knock all the gunk off of the springs. Mm-hmm. And make sure that's and put it back together and see if that fixes it. A lot of times that'll fix it.
Okay. I guess I've been nervous about how much to take apart, because it seems like it's been fitting together for some years.
Well, as I said, take lots of pictures, right?
Yeah.
You might even want to be make sure the right piece, the pieces go back on the place where they put them.
Yeah.
Now there's a little bit of a detail here I want to point out. I don't know if I'm going to be able to show it to you. Down here at the end of your sort of farthest away from the rollers, that holder, in between your rollers, at least on Goldings, and this is true of some other presses, I don't know if it's universally true, your roller hooks are going to have a flat spot here and here. And on the back of this, there's a little metal bar held on with 2 screws that fits into that slot. And what that does is keep the roller hooks from rotating. And particularly if you've got a lot of wear in here, those hooks sometimes want to spin out. There's a Golding 3 at the museum that we're working on right now that does exactly that, because that piece was missing. And if that happens, your roller drops out, and you really don't want the roller to fall out into the press while it's operating, because the press will close on that roller and very possibly break. But that's really, you don't even really need to take that off to touch the press. So don't take it off if you don't have to. So yeah, I'd clean it all up super thoroughly. Give it, make it nice and shiny inside and out, and see if that doesn't fix it. If that doesn't fix it and your springs are just too weak, what kind of press is it?
It's a 12 by 18 Craftsman.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a big one. And I have another question about it, but I don't want to take all the airtime. So yeah.
I mean, springs are a strangely annoying thing. I didn't know there was so much to know about springs till I started doing this stuff. They're all really specific. You may be able to get replacement springs. A Craftsman's a relatively common press. And you can certainly replace it, but to replace it, you need to spec it the right way. And I don't really know how to spec springs. I would, if I needed to cold replace a spring, I would find my machinist guy and say, how do I do that?
Right.
Sherwin Marks at Craftsman might have some available.
Mm-hmm.
He's still
that's
selling stuff.
Different Craftsman.
Oh, okay.
Craftsman press was made by Chandler and Price.
Oh, all right, that
Craftsman.
kind of Craftsman. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. The 12 by 18 standard Craftsman, or the standard CMP springs, will also fit on a Craftsman, with some adjustments. So worst case, if you can't source Craftsman ones, you can use those.
Right.
And I tell you what I've done in the pinch, for some tabletops, I had a tabletop model press that had bad springs. I just got some, big box store springs that were more or less right. Kind of doubled them. I'd put a spring in, put a washer between the springs, put another spring in. So I actually had 2.5 springs doing the job of 1 spring. And I used a Dremel tool to cut off pieces of one of the springs until I got the tension right. It was a fudge, but, at the end of the day, it worked.
NA Graphics.
NA Graphics definitely is a place to check out. Letterpress things. He's sitting on a ton of weirdo spring parts. He might be able to set you up. So it's always worth talking to John Barrett. So other questions? I know there's another question out there.
I was just going to say that I found this extremely informative. I have a Craftsman 9 by 12 press with one side of a droopy set of roller arms. I know what the issue is, but I'm just not sure I've got the wherewithal or knowledge to fix it myself. But that said, I wanted to mention, if you haven't already, because I came in late, you may be familiar with Don Black Line Casting in Toronto, who is a supplier of presses as well as parts for presses. He is closing his doors as of the beginning of September, so he's got an endless supply of parts that he's trying to get rid of. If you need to look for things, you can find him on the web at donblack.ca or donblacklinecasting.ca.
Yeah. People should go look at that and get what they can.
Yeah, because he'll be closing down by the beginning of September.
Right. That's going to be a loss.
Yeah, it really is. It's a real shame too. So, but I do have specific questions pertaining to my press. But again, I don't like one of the other people online, don't want to consume it with a particular bunch of questions.
Well, if anyone wants to circle back with me afterwards, we can connect on, Facebook chat or email or by phone.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked on some craftsmen. I'm far from an expert on craftsmen, but to the extent that I can offer some advice or perhaps point you to someone who knows more about them than I do, I'm happy to do that outside of the context of this meeting.
Sure. If you don't mind, I might take you up on that offer.
Oh, please do. Yeah, please. That's true for everyone listening now or in the future.
Okay. So, again, I joined you late. Where are you working from?
I'm in Massachusetts. My shop is in Lynn, to the north of Boston, and
Okay.
I work out of the Museum of Printing in Haverhill.
Oh, you do? Okay. I'm a firm fan of them on Facebook.
It's wonderful. If anyone's has not once we're able to go places again, definitely go to the Museum of Printing because boy, we have some cool stuff.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this. This has been really helpful for me. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure. I hope this has been useful. It's, as I say, it's just this is just my personal experience. I don't put myself out as an expert at this. This is just trial and error and getting things wrong until you get them right. So, as I say, be fearless with it, right? I mean, don't, but be safe and gentle. But dive in, these presses have lasted a long time. They're reasonably sturdy devices. Take lots of pictures and take them apart, put them back together again. Do that a couple of times and, you'll have a lot of confidence about, making repairs and doing maintenance and it'll help your printing too. The more you have a deep understanding of how the press operates, the better your prints will be because you'll have more control over your press, over its adjustments, and its maintenance. Any other questions or comments?
Okay, guys, we'll go ahead and end our Zoom now then. Big round of applause. I know most of us are on mute, but thank you so much, Mitchell, for all of your time and sharing your immense knowledge with us. I'm so appreciative. And if you guys need to connect with him, if you're not already connected on Facebook, feel free to connect with me through the invite and I'll be happy to help you guys connect. As a reminder, we are going to put the recordings on the YouTube channel once we've had a chance to kind of buffer and make sure that Mitchell's comfortable. So I will repost the YouTube link as soon as it's up in case you need to go back and look at any resources or share the video out that way. And then last thing I want to say is that we have a couple of classes coming up that are scheduled, including a happy hour with Fritz scheduled for tomorrow, and green printing press techniques scheduled for next Thursday. If you know of anyone who might have some knowledge to share with the group or be an interesting speaker, please reach out. I'd love to talk to them about what their interest is and see if we can get them on the schedule. But in the meantime, thank you guys so much for your time, and thank you, Mitchell, again. We'll see you
guys. Thanks so much for coming, and thanks, Dory, for putting this on. This is a really fantastic resource for the letterpress community.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.